Good morning. So this morning we are actually going to make one of the simplest and oldest recipes that I know of in baking, and that is Scotch Shortbread. Now, Scotch Shortbread can be made into cookies, which are great, and you can add a million different things to them to change them up. But they're so simple to make, and they're something that you can make ahead of time and wrap up in parchment paper, or you can make them and immediately form them and put them on a cookie sheet. Or you can make them traditionally, which is to, press them into a round pan and, poke them with holes and bake them in the oven. There are many different ways you can do this, but it's a great base recipe to know, and it's very simple. So first of all, it has 3 ingredients. You have flour, you have butter, and you have sugar. Now, I know this doesn't look like the sugar you may use, and that's fine. You can use, refined sugar. I use an unrefined sugar called sucanat. It is the most raw form of sugar that you can get. It adds a lot of flavor to it because it hasn't been stripped away. All the molasses is actually intact on this. So it gives you trace minerals, so there's actually nutrients in your sugar, but it also gives it a really wonderful flavor. This, when you get it, is kind of dry and crumbly, so in order to get it to incorporate into baked goods here at the bakery, we put it in a blender, in a Vitamix, and blend it just for about 5 seconds, no more than that, or it'll melt up and turn into candy. And we get this kind of fine powdery substance, and that works much better for baking. Now, the recipe for Scotch Shortbread is super easy, although I am going to suggest one thing, and I suggest this to anybody who wants to bake. Now, it's a shift for us because we're used to using measurements in this country, but weight is the way a professional baker goes. And the reason is, if you've ever made cookies, and I'm sure that anybody out there has baked, you'll bake something one time, it'll come out one way, and you'll bake it another time and it comes out differently. And why that is because your measurements are different each time. When you're using a solid measuring cup, you're not going to get the same measurement every single time. So it's actually best to use a scale. Now, recipe for shortbread is very simple. It is 1 part sugar, 2 parts butter, 3 parts flour. Now, what that means is you're going to use, now thinking in scale measurement here, okay? I have 100 grams of sugar, 200 grams of butter, and 300 grams of flour. And you can scale that up and down any way you want, but it's 1/3 sugar, 2/3 butter, 3/3 flour. So 100, 200, 300 on the grams. We usually make much larger batches, but I want to make a small enough batch to show you. Now, so to make this, you want your butter to be room temperature. All you're going to do is put your butter, your sugar, and your flour all in a bowl. And mix it. And this is where the fun is. If you have kids, let them have the fun if you can let them. Although I personally like to get my hands into this. Okay? And just get your hands in there and mix it. Now, I was saying before, you can add things into your shortbread, and you can. This is your basic shortbread recipe. Now, if you want to make this chocolate shortbread, for example, you can take out 1/4 to 1/3 of that weight and replace it, take that weight part out, put it into a measuring cup to see what it measures, and replace by measurement, not weight, because cocoa is not going to weigh the same as flour. Replace that much with cocoa instead of with flour, and you'll make a chocolate shortbread. Or you can add mini chocolate chips to it, and you can make a chocolate chip shortbread. Or you can add lavender to it, make a lavender shortbread. You can add all sorts of things. You can add flavors to it, but remember, you're adding liquid, so you might change your cookie a little bit if you do that, or change your shortbread a little bit if you do that. But there are tons of things. You can get really creative with this. Now, that's it as far as mixing up the dough. See, this is the easiest dough in the world that there is to make. So really not much of a reason not to try it. Now, there are 2 ways that you can do this if you want to make a cookie out of it. At the bakery, and the reason why when you come in, we can tell you, even though the cookies don't all look the same size, they actually are, we use a scoop. And it looks like a simple ice cream scoop. Now you can get these in places like Gordon Food Services stores. They are open to the public, so you can go in and buy these. You can buy them online. This is a 1 ounce scoop. That's what's most commonly used for a cookie. So you would just press your dough into this, and then you can drop your dough out onto your cookie sheet, and then you would flatten it a bit. Now doing that, even if it were on a cookie sheet, you can see you're not going to get a perfectly round cookie. But if you want to do it fast, that's the way to do it. Scooping it out. You do want them to be consistently the same size, because otherwise your cookies bake unevenly. So if you have one cookie that's a lot larger than the other cookie, they're not going to bake evenly. So you want to make sure you can do that. Now if you happen to have some parchment around, or if you get your hands on parchment, or you can even do this with wax paper. I don't recommend foil for this though. You can take your sheet of parchment, you can get your dough on it, just scoop it on out. All right, we're going to roughly shape it at first. There we go. Just kind of, doesn't matter if it's just not perfect, doesn't matter if it's not round at this point, we're going to get it round. Okay, and now you can make your own dough as if you were buying don't know that want to mention the name. If you were buying one of the brand name doughs in a tube, but without all the junk added to it. Okay, you can wrap this up. Once you've got it wrapped up like this, you can roll it out a bit so that you can get a round shape to it. Okay. Take and twist your ends. Shape it a little bit more. And then you can throw this in the refrigerator. So the nice thing about shortbread is that you don't have to put it in the refrigerator. It's a stiff dough. So it actually doesn't need to be refrigerated before you go ahead and cut it. But there's your log, and you can go ahead and cut those cookies. And lay them out onto a cookie sheet. Now if you want to, you can also add nuts to these. Chopped pecans go really nicely in shortbread. Walnuts, macadamia. You can add anything like that that you'd like to, any sort of chip that you would like to, although mini chips work better in this than full-size chips. You can add chipped up toffee to it. You know, the possibilities are endless. We like to actually take our shortbread, we'll melt bittersweet chocolate chips. You can do this with semi-sweet as well, or milk if you don't happen to care for darker chocolate. You melt it, get it down to room temperature. So you don't want to melt it at a super warm temperature. We actually melt it on top of our oven when we're baking, so it's just barely warmed. And then we take it and we will dip our finished baked cookie in there. So once the cookie is baked. Now these will bake for about 15 minutes at 350 degrees. You want it to get a nice dark golden brown, so your oven varies a little bit. Leave them in there a little bit longer if you need to. Somewhere between 15 and 20 minutes depending on the heat of your oven. And you want to bake them till they're a nice golden brown. The shape won't change very much. This isn't the kind of dough that's going to melt out like a chocolate chip cookie dough. It's going to pretty much hold the form that it's at and change just slightly. Now the nice thing about these, like I said, is that they have no leavening in them. You just have butter, flour, sugar, and leavening being baking powder, baking soda. So if you want to, you can leave that roll in the refrigerator for a couple of days. So you can even wrap it in plastic, and yes, you can actually freeze this, then take it out, defrost it in the refrigerator overnight and use it the next day. So that gives you some different options with this. It's very flexible. You can make up large amounts of it at a time, smaller amounts of it, but it's a great dough to work with, and honestly, absolutely delicious. So once you eat these, you'll find yourself getting rather hooked. So there you go. That's one recipe from the Scone Age, and we will be back with more in the future. Hope you enjoy.